Whoa! Hi guys, it's Jason right here, and we're gonna talk about emotions. So what comes in your mind when you heard emotions? Eto ba yun? Hold on, hindi iyan. Emotions is from the Latin word movere, which means literally to move out. Okay, to move out, explain ko yan bakit to move out. Halimbawa, tayo ay mag-move or there's a certain things na gusto mo mag-move. So, emotions are like a flowing particles at para siyang tubig na kailangan gumalaw. And just like us, as a human, we have a different emotions. So, ngayon, itutur ko kayo kung ano ang mga emotions. So, tara! Okay, emotion is a state of mind in which feelings, sentiments, or attitudes are predominant over cognition and volition. So, ang emotion daw ay state ng ating utak or ang pag-iisip kung saan nakaka-include dito ng feelings, sentiments, at attitudes. At dominant siya or predominant siya sa ating cognition at volition. When you say cognition, it is the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding throughout our experience and senses. So, ibig sabihin ng cognition ay ito yung nasa utak natin kung paano mag-process ang ating utak. Next is volition. This is the free power of ourselves. So, usapan natin more about sa emotions. May iba-ibang nakaka-apekto sa emosyon. Ang una dyan ay moods. Moods. Ito ay pinakakilala at this is include mild emotions, temporary in nature, but may last longer but in varying degrees in individuals. When you say moods, ay maraming papasok dito dahil kilala sa mga moods or mga moody ay mga babae. Yun ay ayon sa pag-aaral, pero hindi ko nila lahat. Pag sinabing moods ay ito ay nararamdaman ng or mild emotions ng isang tao kung saan nararamdaman nila in the short period of time. Halimbawa, isang babae na dinadalaw o nagkakaroon ng buwanang dalaw. Dito nagkakaroon ng mood swing. Pag sinabing mood swing ay ito yung pagbabago ng kanyang mood sa pangkaraniwan niyang mood or dun sa another niyang mood or sa iba niyang mood. So dito, mapapansin mo ang isang babae ay medyo matamlay, masungit, o hindi naman kaya wala sa mood. Meron naman tayong tinatawag na good mood or bad mood. Pag sinabing good mood, ito yung parang okay lang, meron kang bonding with them or bonding with other people, and okay na okay siya kasama. And meron naman tayong tinatawag na bad mood kung saan hindi natin matansya kung ano yung emosyon na binibigay niya sa'yo o hindi natin matansya kung paano kanya pakisamahan. At ayun ang moods. But remember guys na ang moods ay temporary lang at hindi na ito kinukonsider na ito na talaga yung tao. Dahil mapag-uusapan natin kung ano talaga yung isang tao. Dahil hindi naman nasusukat sa mood ng isang tao ang pagkakalanlan o personality or ang pinakapagkakalanlan ng buo ng isang tao. According sa ibang studies in psychology, a mood is an affective state. In contrast to emotions or feelings, moods are less specific, less intense, at less likely to provoke. Dahil ang mood ay hindi naman natin hawak at ang mood ay malaki ang pinagkaiba niya at hindi na de-define ng personal traits ng isang tao ang isang mood. And sabi nga nila, moods are typically described as having either or positive or negative valence. So when you say valence, ito yung pagkaka-interpret ng isang tao. Dahil not all moods are good and not all moods are negative. And depende sa pag-interpret ng tao yun kung paano niya maintindihan yung mood ng isang tao. Ang next naman natin is temperament. So, bago sa ating pandinig, di ba? So, ano nga ba ang temperament? Temperament is innate emotional level characteristic of a person. So, in psychology, temperament broadly refers to consistent individual differences in behavior that are biologically based and are relatively independent of learning system of values and attitudes. So, ang temperament ito ay mga individual differences. So, dito na papasok ang konsepto na individual differences. So, when you say individual differences, ito ay pagkakaiba-iba ng tao. Dahil nabuhay tayo ng pagkakaiba-iba, nabuhay tayo dito sa diverse world, so, dito natin malalaman na iba-iba pala talaga ang tao. When you say temperament, ito yung mga behavior or individual differences ng isang tao na biologically, ganun na siya, and na-learn or nag-upgrade siya or nag-evolve siya sa tulong ng kung ano yung natututunan niya sa school, system of values, attitudes, or customs, or beliefs, or other environmental factors. Not only environmental factors, it can also include the social-cultural factors. So, ang example ng mga temperament traits ay ang sociability, impulsivity, at neuroticism. So, when you say in temperament traits, ito yung mga traits ng tao na nakikita natin at nagbabago siya through lifetime. Kagaya ko, mula bata, kilala na ako na madaldal. So, my temperament trait is sociability. So, mahilig ako makipagkaibigan, mahilig ako makipag-usap, hindi ako nabubuhay ng hindi ako nadadaldal. So, mula nung bata ako ganyan, and ngayon nakikita nyo. Because kung ano yung nakita natin nung bata tayo, ay nagre-reflect ngayon. At kung ano yung nakita nung bata, maaring hindi natin nakikita ngayon, nag-upgrade na siya. Pero makikita natin kung ano yung past niya. Okay, next one ay alam natin, preferences. So, preferences are the mildest form of affective states, concerns, or inclinations, biases, likes, or dislikes. So, when you say preferences in psychology, preferences refers to individual attitudes towards a set of objects or other things. Typically, ito yung papasok dito yung tinatawag nating decision-making process. It is, alam naman natin, ang decision-making process is a part of our mental process. So, when you say preferences, ay iba-iba tayo ng prepared ng tao. Kagaya ko, gusto ko malamig, yung ibang tao ay gusto na mainit. At dito papasok, kaya ito ay tinatawag na mildest form of affected state because maliit na porsyento lang naman yung nakaka-apekto dun sa state ng isang tao. Bakit? Dahil ang mundo ay ginawa upang tumanggap at mag-appreciate ng mga bagay na nagawa dito sa mundo. Kagaya ng lahat tayo, may iba-iba tayong preferences. Halimbawa, isang babae, ang gusto niya ay, magbigay talo. Ang isang babae ay gusto niyang maging piloto. Pero ang ibang tao, ang piloto ay nire-refer sa lalaki. Doon pa lang nagkakaroon na tayo ng preferences sa isang tao. Halimbawa naman ay ikaw ay may gusto sa isang tao at ang preferred mo ay maputi, matangkad, makinis, ganon, o alam mo yon, matalino, ganon. So, doon pa lang papasok na yung preferences. So, paano naging mildest form of affective state yon? Because preferences is, it refers to evaluative judgment ng isang tao. So, kung gusto niya o hindi. But in the meantime, people learn to accept the different individual differences of all people kung ano yung preferred ng isang tao. They say nga na you can please anyone to like you and you can please anyone to accept you. So, treasure the people who accepts you and truly loves you. So sabi nga nila, choose your preferences or choose your preferences because it can affect you in the future. Next naman ay ito ang alam natin. This is attitudes. So when you say attitudes, it is an organized patterns of preferences. Could be correct or bad. So dito sa attitudes ay papasok na yung tinatawag nating preferences. So, kapag na-organize na yung pattern or if yung preferences mo ay nabuo, doon bubuo yung attitude na tinatawag. At lahat tayo ay may attitude. Attitude is a psychological context, which is a mental and emotional entity. Bakit pumasok si mental at emotional doon? Why? Because ang attitude ay kung ano yung iniisip natin at kung ano yung nagiging emosyon natin ay parte ng ating attitude. Is complex and acquired state through experiences. So, sabi nga nila na ang attitude ay complex, komplikado, iba-iba at hindi natin matansya. Bakit siya tinatawag na acquired state through experience? Because ang isang attitude ng tao ay naapektuhan ng kanyang pinanggalingan o dun sa kanyang experiences. Why? Because sabi nga kanina, attitudes is organized patterns of preferences. So, every preferences ng isang tao ay merong history yon. Kagaya ko, let's example, my preference is to yung mga sa kaibigan. So, ang preference ko sa kaibigan ay mabait. So, bakit mabait? So, mapapaisip ka, bakit mabait? So, gusto ko mabait dahil preferred ko yon. And based on my experience, kaya yung preferred ko, kasi pag mabait yung tao, mabait din yung pakikitungo ko. So, ang result dan, nabuo na yung aking patterns of preferences na mabait, dapat, alam mo yon, caring siya sa akin, hindi lang caring, may paki siya sa akin, alam mo yung ganon. So, on that case, kapag nabuo na yung patterns of your preferences, ay doon na mabubuo yung attitude mo sa isang tao. So, attitude din ay kung paano ka makipagtungo sa ibang tao, kung paano ka makapag-usap, o kung paano ka halubilo sa ibang tao. Sabi nga nila, kung ano yung attitude ng isang tao, ay makikita mo yan patagal ng matagal. At next one ay ang prejudices or prejudiced. Yan. Dito premierial tayo dahil you heard prejudice ay negative. Definition ng prejudice ay unfavorable attitudes and defended strongly by individual. So, bakit pumasok ang attitude sa prejudice? Why? Because people tend to have a prejudice in that thing if their attitudes are not on them, or kung ano yung prinsipyo ng isang tao ay taliwas doon, kaya nagiging prejudice ang isang tao. So, bibigyan ko kayo ng example or scenario. Halimbawa, ako ay gusto ko ng mababait na tao. Yun ang aking preference. And ngayon, ang attitude ko sa tao ay mabait. Now, may isang taong kumausap sa akin at hindi maganda ang pakikitungo sa akin. Ngayon, ang attitude ko sa kanya ay hindi. So, hindi ko, yung attitude ko nabubuo at dun na nabubuo yung tinatawag na prejudice because unfavorable attitudes. So, hindi lang negative naman ang prejudice. Dahil, pwede nating iikot yan. Halimbawa, kung ikaw ayaw mo na mababait na tao, what they call this term, bitchesa. Kung bitchesa ka sa tao, kasi ikaw yun bitchesa ako kasi yun yung preference ko. Ngayon, ang prejudice mo, yung mga parang tawag dito yung mga mahinhin o yung parang halimbawa dito yung parang sobrang bait ganun. So yun yung prejudice mo na parang ayoko kausapin yan kasi ayoko silang kausapin. So dun papasok yung tinatawag na prejudice. Ngayon ay magbalik tanaw tayo. Handa na ba kayo magbalik tanaw? Hindi ko naririnig. Dapat game na game. Handa na ba kayo magbalik tanaw? Ngayon, magbalik tanaw tayo. So, ang ating mga pinag-usapan kanina, ang moods. Ang moods ay mild emotion at temporary in nature. Ibig sabihin ay hindi ito tumatanggal. Dito ay pwede nating ma-consider or ang example natin dito ay love or bad trip ka. So, when you say next naman is temperament. So, ang temperament ay innate emotional level ng or characteristic ng isang tao. So, ito ni mula bata siya, yun na siya. So, ang temperament ay pwedeng soft-spoken, yung parang mahinhin magsalita. Meron naman yung madiin talaga at parang nagagalit o parang mga high blood, ganun. So, next is preferences. So, sa preferences ay pwede kung ano yung gender mo. Halimbawa, I am a bisexual. I love or pwede ako ma-attract sa lalaki at babae. And sa color naman, my preference is kulay blue because blue means parang peace sa akin. Pero sa ibang tao, ang white is considered as a peace. Yun ang preferences. Next one is attitudes. So sa attitudes naman is merong iba-ibang attitudes. It can be good or bad. Minsan, pwede natin example dito, negative thinker. Puro kang negativity. So, ganun siya mag-isip. So, yun yung attitude niya. Meron namang positive thinker na parang, happy-go-lucky lang kung anong mangyari, ganun. Next one is prejudices or prejudice. Dito naman, papasok kung ano yung pananaw or idealistic or idealism ng isang tao. Halimbawa ako, may prejudices is yung masasama ugali. Kasi ang isang taong masama ugali, parang ang tingin ko ay masama na ugali. Yun yung prejudice ko. Example lang yun, guys, ha. So, yung ibang prejudice, pwedeng discriminate or, alam nyo yun, yung parang hindi unfavorable sa isang attitude ng tao. But, ngayon, ay meron tayong tinatawag na elements of emotions. Merong tatlong nakaka-apekto or elements ng emotions. First one is the body or physiological aspect. Second one is the mind. And third one is the cultural environment. So, isa-isain natin tong tatlong to. Sa body or physiological aspect, ay meron tayong dalawang klase. Meron tayong primary emotions at secondary emotions. When you say primary emotions, ito ay innate and universal. When you say innate and universal, these primary emotions are yung body ang first na nagre-response. Yung primary emotions na nakapapasok dito is the fear, happiness, sadness, and anger. Yung apat na yun. Why? Because yung fear, natatakot ka, naiisip ng utak mo, kaya yun yung primary emotion mo. Next one is happiness. Masaya ka dahil, halimbawa, nawala na yung sakit mo, ganyan. And, ayun, masaya ka. Next one is sadness. Nalulungkot ka dahil, halimbawa, nasugatan ka o nalulungkot ka dahil nasira yung makeup mo, mga ganon. And anger, nagagalit ka dahil pinalo ka ng isang tao o nadulas ka dahil sa isang tao. Doon papasok yung primary emotions. Next one is secondary emotions. Yan. So, in secondary emotions, ay dito papasok yung vary across peoples and culture. So, when you say people and culture, it can be include the social culture or the social and culture environment. So, bakit papasok tong dalawang to? That we have experience on how we feel or what we have to be produced, dito papasok yung mga emotions natin. So, sa secondary emotions ay, halimbawa, may nakita kang tao na nadulas. And, nakita mo yung emosyon niya. And ikaw, dahil sa nakita mo yung taong yon, naramdaman mo yung sakit na parang sumakit yung dito mo. Meron namang mga tao na takot sa injection. Ngayon, kapag in-injection ka rito, nakita mo isang tao, and nakita mo yung facial reaction ng isang tao, or yung nafe-feel mo yung emotion ng tao, dun pa lang nararamdaman mo na, parang ang sakit ng turok. So, dun papasok yung secondary emotion natin because dun sa people at culture na nakapaligid sa atin. Secondary emotions din ay kilala ito para, or nararamdaman natin to, o pinapa-feel natin to sa isang tao. Halimbawa na lang na ikaw ay na-influensyan o parang nafe-feel mo rin yung nararamdaman ng ibang tao. Usually, nararamdaman ito sa mga ating kapamilya, sa ating mga kapuso at kapatid, at nararamdaman ito sa mga nakapaligid or malapit na tao sa atin. The next one is the mind. Bakit pumasok ang the mind sa element of emotion? The mind is our central, this is the central of our body. And the mind, or ang utak natin ay ang punot dulo ng mga ginagawa natin. The mind, thought, and emotion respond with another, and they not opposite. Kasi, hindi naman nag-o-opposite kung ano yung sinasabi ng utak natin sa ginagawa natin. And in this mind, minsan, yung emotion or emotions are part of our mind. Kasi, eto to, kung ano yung iisipin mo, yun yung mararamdaman mo. Halimbawa, parang I feel guilty kasi parang hindi ko siya natulungan, gano'n. So, doon pa lang, nabubuo na yung emosyon mo. So, guilty or yung parang na-guilty ka. So, yun yung iniisip mo sa utak mo. Kasi parang, nasa isip mo na, na-guilty ako. Papasok yung the mind. And the lastly is the cultural environment. When you say cultural environment strongly influences the content of people's emotional experiences. Sa cultural environment ay magpagkalintulad siya sa secondary emotions. Bakit? Sa cultural environment, papasok na dito kung anong kinagistan mo mismo na apekto dun sa values at prinsipyo mo sa buhay. So halimbawa, ako bilang isang tao, na-influensya na akong maging soft-hearted sa mga nangangailangan o na-influensya na akong parang tumulong. Then yun yung kinagisnan ko eh. So, doon ako pinalaki ng aking magulang na maging matulungin kapag may nanghingi ng tulong. Tatlo na yun at yun ang mahalagang elemento ng isang emosyon. At not all emotions are negatively. But emotions are normal. So, sabi nga nila, it's okay to be emotional because emotion is part of our system. Diba nga, meron tayong tinatawag na physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. So, yung apat na yan, or I think 5 siya, ay parte ng ating buhay. So, parang...
Good day, everyone. I am Adelaine or Salvador. And my report is all about the physiological basis of emotion. First of all, I wanted to ask you a question. Have you ever gotten into a fight? It's not like a real fight or a fight. More like an argument. Or with your mom, for example. You had a misunderstanding, or she doesn't allow you to go outside, or she doesn't agree with you. And in the middle of your argument, you just started crying. Maybe because you're upset, or you're sad that she doesn't agree with you. That is because our body automatically reacts during the emotional situation. This is due to the autonomic nervous system. Let's take a look at this picture. As you can see, there is the brain. And in our brain, there is what we call amygdala. The amygdala is a collection of cells near the base of the brain. There are 2, as we can see in the picture, 1 in each hemisphere or side of the brain. This is where our emotions are given meaning, remembered, and attached to associations and responses to them, like emotional memories. The amygdala is considered to be part of the brain's limbic system. Actually, the limbic system, autonomic nervous system, and the other one, reticular activating system, all interact in the physiological processing of emotion. We will only focus on the autonomic nervous system. So the limbic system has particularly known parts or structures, which are hypothalamus, thalamus, amygdala, and hippocampus. So na-mention na natin kanina yung amygdala. And amygdala is also known as the emotional center of the brain, as it is responsible for conditioning and associative learning process. And doon natin nalalaman na, doon natin natutunan na takot tayo sa isang bagay na to. So, if we were to stimulate this area, we can induce emotions such as anger, violence, fear, or anxiety. Halimbawa ay nakapunta ka sa isang magubat na lugar at habang ikaw ay naglalakad ay may nakita kang isang ahas. Anong iyong unang mararamdaman? Kadalasan sa tao, ang ating unang mararamdaman ay takot. Dahil alam natin sa sarili natin na kapag ikaw ay inatake nito ay maaari mong ikamatay. At isa ito sa mga wild animals. At isa nga ang amygdala sa kung bakit ka nakaramdam ng takot because the amygdala has been also best known for processing fearful emotions. So when there is a threatening stimulus from the environment or yung snake nga, it is involved in identifying if it is a threat. Accompanying this kind of fear or any emotion, like when you get excited or super angry, you have probably felt your heartbeat racing or your breathing becomes quicker. And these physiological changes happens unconsciously. Kasi hindi mo naman pinilit or sinabi sa sarili mo na bilisan mo yung paghinga. Automatic siyang nangyayari because there is connections in your nervous system. And the branch that is responsible for these automatic reactions is called the autonomic nervous system. And it has 2 branches, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. And it is activated depending on the environmental stimuli. The difference between the two is that the sympathetic prepares the body for the famous term fight or flight. It is a type of stress response that helps you react to perceived threats. Ang response na ito ay nagkakos ng physiological changes that allows you to act quickly, especially in times of danger. Halimbawa, habang ikaw ay nagmamaneho, bigla na lang mong tumigil ang kotse na nasa iyong harapan. So, ang immediate response mo ay titigil din or magbe-brake ka. While the parasympathetic naman is responsible for the body stress and digestion response when the body is relaxed. Usually, kabaliktaran lamang ito ng sympathetic dahil binabalik lang niya sa dati ang ginawa ng sympathetic. And nag-store din ito ng energy for future use. Here's what happens when your sympathetic nervous system is activated. Your pupils may dilate, your heart accelerates, there's inhibition in your gastrointestinal muscle, and the releasing of adrenaline. However, if the parasympathetic is activated, your pupils is in normal size. You have normal heart rate, normal functioning of gastrointestinal muscles, and there's inhibition of adrenaline release. Ang dalawang ito ay parehong mahalaga. Hindi dapat lumamang ang isa sa isa dahil kailangan nila mag-complement upang ma-maintain ang ating optimal levels. Ang equilibrium na ito ay tinatawag na homeostasis. Every emotion produces different physiological changes within the body, which may include distinct changes, patterns of brain activation, neurotransmitter production, and of course the activities in the autonomic nervous system. So how do we fit emotional elements? Let's have this as an example. Imagine this. One night you are walking alone in a deserted street. You notice that someone is stalking you. Your heart begins pounding, your steps quicken, and you feel scared. As a human being, nagkakaroon ka ng physiological changes where your heart begins pounding, nagkaroon ng physiological arousal, and at the same time, gumagana ang cognitive process mo, which means there is a mental assessment going on. Nagkakaroon ka ng conscious experience kung ano nga ba ang nangyayari. Nandito rin yung general thought mo sa nangyayari kaya you feel scared. This is an example of feelings or conscious experience happening as a result of emotions. And these emotions produces behavioral responses or expressions and reactions. So dito, ang naging example is the person's steps quicken. To conclude this report, these expressions may vary depending on the individual and can be interpreted differently depending on their experiences or culture.
Hi, I am Martha Dennisse Virrey from 1C1 and today we will talk about the theories of emotion. First, let us have the Watson's theory. Watson theory is proposed by John Brodus Watson. Watson was interested in the conditioning of emotions. Of course, behaviorism, putting an emphasis on people's external behaviors, emotions were considered as mere physical responses. Watson thought that at birth, there are three unlearned emotional reactions: the fear, rage, and love. It was Watson's new behaviorism that would pave the way for further advancement in psychology. And the next theory is the Canonbard Theory. The Canonbard Theory of emotion states that stimulating events trigger the feelings and physical reactions that occur at the same time. For example, seeing a snake might prompt both the feeling of fear and raising a heartbeat. Canonbard suggests that both of these reactions occur simultaneously and independently. In other words, the physical reaction isn't dependent on the emotional reaction and vice versa. The Canonbard proposes that both of these reactions originate simultaneously in the thalamus. This is a small brain structure responsible for receiving sensory information. It relates to the appropriate area of the brain for processing. When a triggering event occurs, the thalamus might send signals to the amygdala. The amygdala is responsible for processing strong emotions such as fear, pleasure, or anger. It might also send signals to the cerebral cortex, which control conscious thought. Signals sent from the thalamus to the autonomic nervous system and skeletal muscles control physical reactions. These include sweating, shaking, or tense muscles. Sometimes, the Canonbard Theory is referred to as the Thalamic Theory of Emotion. The theory was developed in 1972 by Walter B. Cannon and his graduate student Philip Bard. It was established as an alternative to the James Lynch theory of emotion. This theory states that feelings are the result of physical reactions to a stimulating event. And the last theory is McDougall's theory of emotion. McDougall holds the emotions are function and instincts. Primary emotions are conscious correlates of instincts. He say each of the principal instincts conditions some one kind of emotional excitement whose quality is specific or peculiar to it. He gives the following pairs of instinct and emotions correlated to each other. McDougall is right when he enunciates the principle that every emotive situation appeals to an instinctive tendency, but his list based on the principle is insufficient and unscientific. For example, anger does not always arise from pugnacity. Tender emotion may arise from the instincts than the parental. McDougall mentions a number of instincts with less well-defined emotive reactions. Examples: the instinct of reproduction, the gregarious instinct, the instincts of acquisition and construction. Yet, there are well-defined emotions of security, of self-expansion, of possession, and etc., which have not been mentioned by McDougall. His theory is very attractive, but it has not been worked out very satisfactorily. Some instincts, example, instinct of walking, sitting, standing, running, seem to have no specific emotions attached to them. Anger and fear resemble each other very closely as organic states that, though they differ as impulse. The really distinct emotions are much fewer than the instincts. So McDougall's theory may be regarded as a working hypothesis. When we find an emotion, we find also a tendency to action that leads to some end result. But though emotion and instinct are closely connected with each other, we cannot hold that corresponding to every instinct there is an emotion, and corresponding to every emotion there is an instinct. There are many instincts which are not accompanied by any specific emotions. Further, the same emotion may include a variety of instinct in its system. The instinct of concealment and flight both operate in the emotion of fear. Again, the same expression may be not connected with different emotions, such as the same emotion may be organized in different sentiments. So the same instinct may be organized in different emotions. The instinct of flight may operate in birds in fear as well as anger. Moreover, when the instinctive act evoked by a situation runs smoothly, the individual does not feel an emotion. But when the individual cannot effectively cope with the situation and his instinctive response is thwarted, he feels an emotion. Therefore, an instinctive act is not always accompanied by an emotion. Hence, McDougall's theory may be regarded as a working hypothesis. It contains core of truth in it. It points out an intimate connection between instinct and emotion.
Good day everyone, so I am Joana Pante. I am also here to discuss the theories of emotion. The central theory and somatic theory. The central theory is its emotion come after thinking. So, comes from cerebral cortex, which is responsible for many higher order brain functions. It is also play a key role in attention, perception, awareness, thought, memory, language, and consciousness. So for example, you think happy moments or mga memories na kasama ang family mo, kasama yung loved ones mo, then your brain will form an emotion of being happy or happiness. On the other hand, the somatic theory, in somatic theory, its emotion comes before thinking. So, somatic means relating to the wall of the body. The best example in somatic theory is anxiety. Remember that when we experiencing anxiety, it's accompanied with physical symptoms. So, just like what I've said, somatic theory is relating to the wall of the body. And a person or a people who are experiencing anxiety accompanied with physical symptoms like pain, dizziness, sweating, or other physical symptoms. And it is also, example of this is concern, worry, or pagkabalisa, pag-iisa, ganyan. Kasi 'di ba, alam niyo yung phrase na inuunahan tayo ng emotion. So next is the James Lang theory. It comes from environment influence to physiological change and psychological change. James states that stimulating events trigger a physical reaction. A physical reaction is then labeled with a corresponding response. So, example ng James Lang theory, if you run into a snake, your heart rate increases, then it makes us realize that we're afraid. So, yung environmental influence doon, you are running into a snake. Dahil nakakita ka ng snake, tumakbo ka. And yung physiological change naman doon, yung heart rate mo is tumaas, nag-increase, then pwede rin na pinagpawisin ka, you're sweating. And the psychological change is that you are afraid. James suggests that when you are sweating or your heart rate increase, it makes us realize that we are afraid. And also, heart rate increase or sweating also makes us or form an emotion such as afraid, surprise, fear, or joy. To wrap up, in James Lang theory, the emotion form or occur from the influence of the environment that trigger a physical reaction. So the last theory is the Matthew Arnold theory. It is also related to cognitive appraisal theory. It will start from your attention. For example, nakakuha ng attention mo yung mga K-drama at ganap sa K-drama or mga movies. Then magkakaroon ka ng perceptual analysis. Sa perceptual analysis, it refers to a specific process of the brain and mind, or a process of perceptions or making sense of perceptions and experiences. You know the phrases of what you see is what you get. The way we see the world is heavily influenced by our own expectations, experience, motivations, and even emotions. Because perceptions can also be influenced by an individual's expectations, motives, and interest. Yun, at dahil, example nga nun, at dahil yung attention mo or interest mo ay K-drama, you might think na mangyayari din yun or may possibility na mangyari din yun in real life, especially in your own experience. And that is the perceptual analysis. Ina-analyze mo yung pinagtutuunan ng attention mo. Then, you will get into a situation. Situation, kung ano yung napanood mo is parang the same nung nangyari dun sa K-drama na pinapanood mo, sa drama na pinapanood mo. For example, you will get in a situation na nakita mo yung boyfriend mo may kasamang ibang babae. And your perception is, sabi na mangyayari din to gaya ng napanood ko. Kasi di ba yung napanood mo, kanya halimbawa napanood mo sa K-drama is cheating of a man to his woman. Then ang cognitive appraisal mo naman, cognitive appraisal means is an act of evaluation or interpretation. So yung cognitive appraisal mo, nakita mo yung boyfriend mo na may kasamang iba, so nasaktan ka sa nakita mo. It is harmful. Therefore, you're hurt and mad at the same time. So, your emotional expression, galit ka or malungkot ka kasi nasaktan ka. So, ang response mo naman dito or action mo, pwede mong maging action is umiyak. Diba sa mga drama, when they saw their man cheating to them, they're crying. Or pwede natin gayahin yung eksena na sinampal yung babae or yung lalaki kasi to express na nasaktan ka or galit ka. Yun. So, the process here is from attention to perceptual analysis and the situation, wherein you will have in order events. That is the situation, your perception, your cognitive appraisal, and the emotional expression, and your response or action. To sum it up, in Macho-Arnold theory, the emotion occurs after being exposed in a situation, then having our own perception, we appraise or interpret the situation, then we feel the emotion or express the emotion, then we will have a body response or action. So the three remaining theories of emotions are central and somatic theory, James Lang theory, and the Macho-Arnold theory.
A blessed day, everyone. I am Rhoda Rivera, and I will discuss the sources, classification, and functions of emotions. So now, let's tackle first the sources of emotion. Emotions are acquired and learned through imitation, conditioning, and awareness. Yes, we have three sources of emotions. The first one is imitation. Imitation is intended to simulate or copy something else that builds up as our emotion. For example, when we watch a movie and there is a sad scene, unexpectedly, we are also felt the sadness of the character. And sometimes, we don't even perceive that we're almost crying. Even though we're not the character, we do feel and imitate the emotions in the movie. The second one is the conditioning. Conditioning refers to the process of accustoming a person to behave in a certain way. Or from the word condition, it is a mental action to understand a certain situation and build up our emotion due to experiences or what we sense. It is something like the mood swing, like due to the environment or inside feeling. For example, like in social condition. You felt annoyed into something or someone. Your emotion will be mad or angry. And lastly, the awareness. Awareness refers to the knowledge or perception of a situation or fact. For example, you get promoted on your job. Since you're aware that this kind of event is a luck, blessing, and worth your sacrifices, it will automatically build your emotion into joy and grateful. It is weird if you will still the sadness, right? So of course, we are aware to be happy in the success that we are experiencing. So again, the three sources of emotions are the imitation, conditioning, and awareness. So now, let's move on to the classification of emotions. Emotions are either basic or complex. These are the following classification: personal, social, and aesthetic and intellectual. Let's go first to the personal. Personal emotion represent bodily feelings experienced as arousal of the nervous system, wherein no one else can experience your feelings in the same way that you do, such as joy, sadness, pride, shame, anger, fear, remorse, and guilt. Next is the social. Social emotion is depend upon the thoughts, feelings, or actions of other people, such as friendliness, compassion, affection, hostility, envy, hate, and intolerance. Lastly is the aesthetic and intellectual. When we say aesthetic emotion and intellectual emotion, these are the emotions that are felt during appreciation nor appraisals of specific cognitive objects. These are expression of artistic admiration, critical reviews, and standing ovation. So again, those are the classification of emotions: the personal, social, and aesthetic and intellectual. Now, let's move to the functions of emotions. The first one, it motivates an individual's learning process. In simple as, the more emotions we come up, the more experience we learn. We are motivated because of emotion. Because when we experience the emotions that we don't meant, we seek for the actions that make our emotions better. And that's how we learn. Next is, prepares, regulates, and may limit or restrict the actions of individuals. Yes, because emotions are appropriately show up into certain situation, or simple as emotions corresponds to our feelings. Next, releases tension and energy. Yes, such as emotions brings out the feeling of being totally uncomfortable. For example, you experience in pain or hurt by someone else. Your emotion begins to appear. This is when you cry. Once people in pray cry, due to the sadness or anger, after that emotion, you will feel the relief. Next is, it provides signification or symbolic expressions. Because emotion represents our expression. Like, when someone is pouting their lips, that person is obviously mad or irritated. Next, it inspires people to strive and aim for lofty ambitions and creativity. Because we are aware of the actions that will fulfill our good side emotion, or sometimes when we experience being down, we are going to seek for the good actions to be better. Next one is improves the character traits and personality of individual. Because emotion builds up our personality through what it sends. And the next one, it determines the direction of one's behavior. Yes, of course. As I have said earlier, we can easily notify someone's behavior throughout their emotions. For example, someone is easily to cry in just a little thing. That means that person is sensitive. Lastly, it affects some bodily processes. So like what the other says, your emotion reflect on who you are and build you physically and personally. And that's are the functions of emotions. The continuation of the other details about our topic will be reported to the next reporter. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Sheila Cuerpo and my report is about emotional expression. There are some classifications or different classifications such as anger, fear, depressive reactions, and love. But first, let's define emotional expressions in verbal. It uses words in expressing the emotion feelings. It might be written or oral. For example, nag-away kayo ng jowa mo, pero tatanungin mo pa rin siya kung kumain na siya. And that's an example of an emotional expression kasi pinapa-feel mo sa kanya yung love kahit na magkaaway kayo. Next thing is about non-verbal. Non-verbal such as facial expression, gestures, sounds, silence, and voice inflection. Nandyan lahat yan sa gilid. And yung example naman nito is kapag nagtatampo ka, pwede dito yung bigla ka na lang nanahimik, nagpa-pout, o kaya yung mga singhal. Now, let's talk about its first broad classification, the anger or galit. Anger is an emotional characterized by antagonist towards someone or something you feel has deliberately done you wrong. Anger can be a good thing. It can give you a way to express negative feelings or motivate you to find solution to problems. But excessive anger can cause problems. For example, yung cheating incident ng Jolay. Nandun yung galit dahil sa cheating, pero hindi nila alam na parang nagiging excessive na yon, excessive anger na, kasi parehas na nasisira yung reputation ng dalawang tao and yung isa na kasama sa nag-cheat. So, parang hindi na nagiging maganda. So, second, in the broad classification of emotional expression is fear or takot. Fear is a natural, powerful, and primitive human emotion. It involves a universal biochemical response as well as high individual emotional response. Fear alerts us to the presence of danger, of the threat or harm. Whenever the danger is physical or psychological. For example nito is fear of heights. May mga tao na may takot talaga sa matataas na lugar. Pero may mga taong sumusubok na ma-overcome yung fear na yun. Pero meron talagang sa psychological na hindi talaga kaya yung mga matataas na lugar kasi masyadong yung thinking na baka dito ako mamatay, dito ako malaglag or something. Third in the broad classification is the depressive reaction. Depressive reaction, a goal-related emotion of an after effect of a failure. Depressive reaction such as sadness, grief, and loneliness. Example dito is yung nag-fail ka sa exam. And yung exam na yun is kailangan na kailangan mo kasi yun na yung way mo para makagraduate. And hindi mo yun napasa. And your parents mo, nag-expect na sila nag-graduate ka that time, tapos makakatulong ka na sa kanila. Pero, hindi ka nakapasa. So, kailangan mong bumalik. Tapos, kailangan nila ulit magsikap para makatapos ka. And doon nag-start yung depressive reactions kasi nafe-feel mo na unworthy na kasi nag-failed ka. And lastly, in broad classification of emotional expression is love. Love encompasses a range of strong positive emotional and mental state. From the most sublime virtue of good habit, the deepest interpersonal affection to the simplest pleasure. Sa love, hindi lang natin matatagpuan yung pag-ibig sa boyfriend, sa girlfriend. Matatagpuan din natin yun sa ating family, friends. Siyempre, sa-start talaga yun sa family, sa friends, and sa relatives. Sa mga taong nakapaligid sa atin at sa mga taong sumusuporta sa atin sa pang-araw-araw natin life. And that ends my report. Again, I am Sheila Cuerpo. And my report is about emotional expression. Thank you for listening. God bless.